is Padmini Nidumolu again on LIA100 channel. And LIA100, as most of you might be aware, is a project under Lean In Agile to bring 100 women into this space where they can share their stories, their journeys, their trials, their triumphs, how they got to where they got to, and what are the lessons we as community learn from them and leverage from them. And so far we have identified 50 women and bringing their stories to you. You can find all their stories on our YouTube channel, and we will be publishing them on our website as well. But it's been such a tremendous honor and pleasure to bring these awesome, amazing women to this platform. And today we have yet another inspiring leader with us. In fact, I think she is far ahead of her times, obviously, and you'll know why in this pandemic that we are fighting, COVID-19. She is Molood Ceccarelli, and Molood is referred to as Queen of Remote Work in the Agile world for the right reasons, I guess. She's the first person to officially challenge the premise of collocation as a prerequisite to agility. She has been an advocate for remote work, and she has been geographically working at distributed teams for over a decade. And she's the organizer of the first and so far the biggest online remote summit on the topic of Distributed Agile, Remote Forever Summit. And you'll see it happening every year. So please don't forget to attend that, because I did myself, which brings together 20 speakers who are thought leaders of Agile, and people such as James Grenning, Lyssa Adkins, and a few amazing speakers have spoken at this online summit. And it usually attracts about 3,000 attendees, which is phenomenal, from across the world. She believes remote work is no longer the future of work, which we are clearly seeing now, but rather the reality of it. As an Agile coach, she is on a mission to help the organizations and individual entrepreneurs to experience freedom and happiness in their work. She is a keynote speaker, prolific speaker, and shares her views through speaking and through her newsletters. Welcome, Molood. How are you?
Thank you. That was such an introduction. I'm well. How are you yourself?
I'm doing well, trying to discover ways and means to keep this remote working interesting and productive. So there's a lot
Aren't
to
we
learn from
all?
you. So yeah, let's get started on that topic, in fact. So you're the pioneer of remote work, clearly, right? You've started this, what, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it would be 4 years ago now that we're actually talking into 2020.
Yeah, so 4 years of work, and now it's become the reality of the world, right? Suddenly we are all in the situation where we have to find ways and means to kind of be productive and still connect to our teams and organizations remotely. So tell me, what got you interested in this remote work in the first place?
That's a very good question. I get this asked quite often, especially nowadays in the middle of the pandemic where people are experiencing remote working for the first time. It's an easy answer though. I used to have the personal retrospectives for myself, for my work, a long time ago, like a long time before I even started my business. And there was a Sunday, I remember this, like sitting at a cafe, sipping on my coffee, and I realized there was not a single team that I had been a part of that was not distributed. I had never been a part of a completely collocated team. Every single project I was a part of, every single team that I was a part of had either dependencies to people in other countries or other cities, or the team itself, the core of the team itself was somewhat distributed. And of course, I knew from my learnings of Agile that collocation is a prerequisite. And yet I saw myself repeatedly making teams agile, helping them to use a Scrum and Kanban and bring the Lean principles into their working. And I thought, wait a minute, there is something there. There is something that is not matching. Perhaps Agile has actually changed since 2001. And that's what brought me to exploring this idea further and eventually I created Remote Forever Summit and my company Remote Forever to promote the idea of remote working in Agile. And I strongly believe that Agile itself is the answer to all the challenges of remote working that people are experiencing. So I hoped with my work that I would bring remote working into the Agile world. And now that so many people are suddenly remote, they are seeing how important it has always been.
That's some forethought you had, and it's clearly, you know, helping. I think, you know, some of the communities and folks that you've engaged with to kind of bring that forth. So, in the current situation, right, Molo, you must have been exposed to so many tools. I mean, there's so much content on LinkedIn and on social media as to how can you make your remote, coordination, collaboration better. Do you see that some of the techniques and practices and tools that you have been kind of advocating and teaching are being used, or do you see a surge of, very innovative tools out there?
It's both, actually. I do see a lot of things that I've been teaching being used, and it's a pleasure to see them. Like I feel the butterflies every time, I see someone use something that I have taught. But also there are new tools popping up everywhere, and there are new experts popping up everywhere. I've even seen a company that was against remote working position themselves as experts of remote working and bursting information out in the world. So
That's
what I
funny.
see is happening is that a lot of the people that are forced to work in remotely are trying to figure it out, and they are often like going to what they think might work, and it's a good thing because they're experimenting, but it's also a bad thing because a lot of these practices that they're suddenly adopting and are suddenly advocating for a whole organization of a couple thousand people to adopt, they can be harmful for them in the long run. I've even seen platforms pop up that are claiming to be the solution to all of your remote working challenges. And I think that people out there should be very cautious about how they go about this. And I can talk about that extensively if you have like a further follow-up question on that. But what
Yeah,
I
no,
really
definitely,
see,
definitely. Yeah. No, I think,
that this is a change,
yeah,
it's a change, and every company, every organization, every leader needs to address it the same way that they address every other big change that impacts their whole organization.
yeah,
So when a company used to have like waterfall for their software development and they wanted to adopt Agile, there was a whole thinking, education,
yeah,
process of change
definitely.
management that went into that. Remote working is the same. But what we're experiencing right now is not like systematic remote working, is not a
Yeah.
systematic approach to remote working. It's surviving in a crisis. And I can tell you, working from home is not the same as working remotely. What I think it was, gosh, what was his name? I can actually give you the name later so you can put it here. But there was a talk that I had with someone recently, and they said what we are experiencing right now is not working from home. It's living through a crisis and trying to get work done while we are at home. And I thought that was
Mm.
so beautifully said.
So how do you differentiate then working remote and working from home? Is it the survival versus systemic change, I'm assuming?
It's partly that. The fundamental difference, however, is that when you work remotely, outside of a pandemic, outside of a global health crisis, what it gives you is freedom. That's like the major value that it gives you. It gives you the freedom to work from wherever you are most productive. And for a lot of people, that is not their home.
Yeah,
And it also gives you the ability
I
to
see.
separate where you get work done and where you do everything else. Nowadays, however, our work and life are so intertwined, are so integrated that it becomes very much harder for people to even talk about work-life balance. What we're
Yeah,
doing is our work and life are integrated, and it happened so suddenly. We had no time to reflect, to adapt.
true, true. Yeah, and do you think, based on everything that's going on in the world right now, and how organizations, I think, are beginning to think, maybe this is the future, right? That maybe is coming into the picture now, not because we are expecting this pandemic to be forever, but because we have stress tested so many things that organizations have never even dreamt of doing before, and they've seen the productivity is the same or even increased. So I think organizations now are beginning to think a little bit differently. Do you think at least a portion, a percentage of the organizations across the world will turn to remote working gradually because it decreases their costs and increases efficiency, as you said, freedom? Do you think that's on the
Yeah.
horizon?
Well, I've been saying this for years, right? And there's been studies to prove that remote working is on the rise. And everyone used to say remote work is the future. And I kept saying, hold on, it's not the future. I've been working this way for 10 years now. So I used to say it's today, it's the reality.
Yeah.
But for many people who were in denial, who were resisting it, it is suddenly the reality. So they see that it is the reality. And I think that definitely they will see that this is the future. And in fact, actually, Gartner did a research recently, and they did a survey, and about 74%, if I'm not mistaken, 74% of the CFOs of companies that are suddenly distributed have decided to keep these temporarily or these suddenly remote positions as permanently remote. 3 out of 4 CFOs, that's a large
That's a
portion.
lot. Yeah, it's significant. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
wow.
so definitely.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting, right? By the time the Gen Z folks come into the workforce, I think it'll be
Yeah.
such a different world. I
I
think,
think so too. I think we would be so much more accepting of remote working as just work.
yeah.
It would not be seen as a challenge. I've been getting this question so much this past few years. They said, how do we make this challenge of remote working less impactful? How can we address this challenge? And now people don't see it as a challenge anymore. They see it as a reality. And they're like,
Yeah.
how do we get work done? This is our situation. This is how we work. How do we get to results X, you know?
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, right? Challenge versus this is the reality, let's figure it out. I think
Yeah,
we're all doing it
exactly.
together now. That's the beauty of it. We're all doing it together.
Hmm.
So, are there things that don't work in a remote setting or which are
Yeah,
particularly challenging?
of course. You can't smell people. That's what I say as a joke. I think like when you work remotely, you have to think differently. You have to behave differently. You need to change a part of your mindset about work and about communication. And that's the part that many people miss.
Yeah.
And that's quite unfortunate. I get this question of what tool should I use to do X? You know, what tool is better for running online retrospectives? What tool is better to have better daily scrums? What tool is better for this and that? Or some people go out of the tools question and they focus on the process. And they say, how can I do this brainstorming that I used to do in an online
Yeah.
setup? How can I do a lean coffee in an online setup? And I keep like hearing tools and processes that is the focus. I say, guys, Agile has the answer for you. Focus on individuals and interactions. Instead of asking what tool should I use or how do I replicate this process, ask yourself, what is the purpose that I'm trying to achieve? What
Yeah.
is the outcome that I'm trying to achieve? And how can I empower these individuals to interact with each other? The answer might not even be in that same process that they used to have before.
Right.
You used to have daily scrum, for example. What was the purpose of it? We have come so far away from thinking about the purpose and the outcome that we have gotten stuck in tools and processes. And that's quite unfortunate because the people that are my audience are usually agile leaders and agile coaches who are supposed to be teaching other people not to get stuck in tools and processes and move beyond that and get
Yeah.
creative.
And then they're being stuck themselves, right? I think that's
Yeah,
very true. I think we become part of furniture, very
yeah,
unfortunately, in an organization or in a setting. So I think pausing and reflecting is so incredibly important to kind of
definitely.
reflect. Yeah. So you organized one of the very early online, completely online, Remote Forever Summit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this is the fourth year you'd be doing it, or the third year?
Yes,
Fourth year,
it's
right?
the fourth year.
Yeah, so I did register and subscribe, and I think I was part of it a couple of years ago, and absolutely loved the concept. In fact, in DMV space, right, in DC, Virginia, Maryland space, we have our spirals. Spirals are, the group of women in a geography
Mm-hmm.
coming together to support each other, to offer to each other, and seek from each other, right? So one of the organizers in our spirals, Meenakshi Iyer, she said, I got so inspired by what Molood was doing and is doing with Remote Forever Summit. So she's in fact inspired by you, holding the
Oh, that's so
summit
sweet.
next week, this coming week. In fact, she said, I told her I'm interviewing Molood this weekend, and she said, amazing, that's exactly what inspired me. So I want to let you know that I
Thank
think
you.
it
That's
weighs,
very sweet to hear.
yeah. So you did impact, um, that mode of collaboration across the world. So you should be proud of it. So
Yeah.
when you first visualized that remote summit, right? What made you think that that will be successful? Because everything was in person, right? That there was this big
Mm-hmm.
bang in person conferences. What made you go forward with that thought?
Okay, I'm gonna get very vulnerable with you here. I had no idea it would be successful. None
Okay.
whatsoever. I just had a vision and an idea, and I saw this as the reality, and I was frustrated that nobody else saw it as a reality. And I thought, if I put this idea out there, there are two things that could happen, like two completely different ways it could go. Either people are going to see what I see and support me, or they're going to say, who do you think you are? What the hell are you talking about? Go away. And I was actually not even imagining that it would be as big as it was. I remember I still have my spreadsheets from planning of the first one, and I thought, if 50 people sign up, I'd be happy. But my goal is to get 200 people to sign up. And imagine what happened. Like when I put this together and I asked the people that would be speakers there, and many of them said yes. I was already like feeling that I was onto something bigger than what I had imagined. But I was still stuck in the number 200. I thought 200 registrants and I'd be super happy. And 200 people registered in the first hour. We
Wow.
went live and we had that many people, and I thought, oh my god, this is getting out of control. This is getting so much bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And I just went along and made the summit happen. And I was so lucky that I'm so fortunate that I had put together a good team to help me to make it happen. And we
Yeah.
pulled it together. Our vision was something so much smaller, and then suddenly we had to expand and deliver something for about 2,600 people who had registered for that first year.
Wow.
And again, it was new. It was a very new concept in the whole industry. Nobody had seen an Agile conference be completely online. But the
Yes.
feedback was so positive, like everything was so positive. So the fact that it was so sudden and it has such a big emotional impact, I was not even sure that I wanted to repeat it because it was so much work. But then the people started asking for it. They said, hey, Milo, you have to repeat it. You have to do this again. We want more of this. This was so inspiring. So the fact that I actually repeated it every year was because the industry asked me to do that. They were demanding it. And I hope that this year it would prove to people that we can do something even differently, like even newer than
Absolutely.
that, and show them like what the future would look like. Because
Yeah.
now everyone has seen online conferences and everyone has seen online collaboration. What is
Yeah.
next? I hope that I still have the foresight to show people what is next.
Very true. And in fact, I'm sharing this with you, right? I got so inspired by what you did. And
Thank
I've
you.
been contemplating doing something similar for LIA100. So I must say that my initial inspiration is drawn from you. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be a leader that can inspire others. That's really what is driving me to keep going.
Yeah.
to see the impact.
Yeah, you do in ways that you can't imagine.
Do
But
ask me if you
I
need any
know.
help though.
Yes, yes. I wanted to touch on what you just said, right?
Hmm.
Initially, I mean, you said you're getting vulnerable. You really had some doubts, right, on how it was going to go because it
Absolutely.
was first of its kind. So when you, in general, not just on that topic, but when you, in general, when you hit a roadblock, and when you have a self-doubt, when your ecosystem is not supportive or simply nothing is going as planned, how do you get yourself out of that roadblock?
It's a hard thing to answer. I hope some people can relate to this. I am wired this way. I grew up a little differently than the majority of the world grows up. I grew up as top 1% high IQ people in the country, right? I
Wow.
was selected as a kid. They took a test and they said, you are going to get this special education because you're smarter than everyone else. And I thought, like, as a kid, you think whatever, grown-ups tell you is the truth. But
Yes.
as time went on, I realized, like, after I finished my high school, I had spent 7 years in a special school that only taught science, math, numbers, education that was not focused on how to create human connections, how to, get out of a group and play games together, how to have fun together. That was not part of the curriculum, right? I was very, like, in that environment, it was very scientific. So when I entered the real world outside of that like, and I say real world, but I'm still thinking about school. That was academia, right? It was college. In college, I met people from all sorts of
Sure.
backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I realized I was not able to communicate as effectively with those people. But one thing I never struggled with was confidence, and uh, like, I had no fear of failure because that was how I was raised. We were in that particular school growing up, we were always encouraged to fail and learn from it. It was not okay to just not do something because you're afraid that you might fail. It was the exact opposite. So I never really experienced how
Hmm.
to get myself out of a roadblock kind of situation. But what I have experienced, though, is feeling something and then not knowing what that feeling is and not knowing how to get over that. Like, this, what you're mentioning is, like, when I started this whole idea and I wanted to put myself out there, I had no problem putting myself out there and maybe, like, being shunned and, being asked to move away. What I had, however, what I was struggling with was what would happen to my future if, this second scenario happened. And I had to visualize it, like, because I was wired this way, as I told you, like, I had the tools, and my tools were, you imagine the worst case scenario and you talk to yourself, you basically analyze it and figure out, are you okay with it? And
Yeah.
I was okay with it. I was okay with going back to coding if that was the worst case scenario. I said the worst case scenario is that the agile world will eject me and I would have to become a developer again and, do, like, be on the other side. And then I can build myself up again. And I was okay with that. So as soon as I knew what was the worst case scenario, which probably a stoicism also teaches you, imagine the worst case scenario and be okay. If you're okay with it, go forward. There is nothing else to be afraid of.
Yeah, and I do that a lot. So I'm definitely aligned, but it's a good message, right? When you hit a roadblock, just contemplate and reflect on what could go wrong, what's the worst that can happen, and proceed only if you're okay
Yeah.
with it, right? No, that's a great
I think
message.
that we do a lot of, like, imagining the worst case scenario, but
Yes.
we go too far. We really, really have, I don't know
Yeah.
why, but I think as a human race, we love to go too far and imagine the worst thing happen.
Yeah.
And the worst part of this is that we go into this trade of thought when something good is happening in our life.
Yeah.
You know how they say you need to get out of your comfort zone to really experience joy and happiness. And I think the moment we get one step closer to experiencing that, but imagine the worst case scenario,
And then you
imagine,
feel.
like, a car crash, and, like, yeah, and we stop ourselves. So I think
Yeah.
this premeditated imagination of the worst case scenario and being okay with it can also help us move forward and not allow the roadblocks, the emotional blocks, to stop us from moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think this is very timely for women because we do we do tend to hold up a lot more than men. So thank you for sharing that. It's a real life experience coming from you, so it can get valuable than that. So I would like to touch on something, right? So in the remote setting,
Mm-hmm.
have you, in your experience, seen that women are able to raise their voice and have a seat at the table and still share their perspectives, their ideas equal to the other gender? In terms of in the remote setting, have you seen the voices raised equally on both sides? Or were the women
Honestly,
a little bit?
I'm not that observant of this particular thing because, again, due to my upbringing, I don't see genders as vividly as other people would. So for me, it's harder. I have to be told, hey, Molood, did you notice that there were only men in the room? Or hey, Molood, did you notice that there were only women in the room? Like, I don't see that as vividly as others do. But what I do see, based on the feedback that I have received from the summit and from the work that I do, remote work is more inclusive of genders, of
Oh,
people with different abilities, of people with different backgrounds and
yeah.
incomes and different heights and different, shapes and forms and colors. So the idea that remote work is actually more inclusive, naturally, I would assume it would give women a better chance to include themselves if they choose to. So I don't have data to prove that this is the fact, but what I have is data from the feedback that I have received. Like a woman in the US who has been at my summit every year and keeps coming back because it's the only Agile summit that she's been able to attend because she has a disability and she would not be able to move to a physical conference.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's amazing. That is so profound. That is so profound,
Yeah,
right?
I think
More
so too.
inclusive.
I've also gotten the same kind of feedback from people in Africa or in some poor Asian countries that they came to me and they said, the way that you had set this up, the fact that there was a free option and we could learn from top minds with leaders that we would not even imagine learning
Yeah,
from because we couldn't afford them. This
yeah,
was inspiring and that was inclusive. That's because, remote working and remote conferences are allowing this level of inclusion. So if you want to empower a minority group, I would say remote working is actually the easiest way to go about it.
sure. Yeah, because they have more access to it. And as you
Yeah,
said,
more
it's
access.
truly inclusive, truly global, right? There are no
Hmm.
geographical barriers anymore. No, that's amazing. I wouldn't have thought that way. So uh, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, you're
Awesome.
welcome. It's important to me. Inclusion has always been important to me, and it keeps being reflected in the work that I do.
Yeah, clearly. So finally, I know that you've shared a number of great nuggets here. Finally, what would be your message to the community? It could be a sentence, it could be a word, it could be a thought.
Okay, let's see. A mistake that many of you are making when you start working remotely is that you are focusing on tools and processes and you're trying to replicate in-person interactions in an online environment. Instead of that, go back to the purpose and the outcome and try to empower interactions between individuals and make sure that you get to that purpose and outcome.
Awesome. That was so beautiful, Molood. I think, I can see that you're so clear in your mind about the purpose that you have been insisting on, right? That people should have. It just shows so clearly that you have a
Thank you.
mission, you have a purpose, you have a vision, and you're executing on it very crisply.
I
So I
do.
think
Thank
as a
you.
community, we are so grateful to have you amongst us so you can lead
Thank you
this
so much for
team.
inviting me and having me.
Absolute pleasure. It is our pleasure and hope to bring more of your messages back to LIA100. So thank you so much, Molood.